Welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of the Dialexicon podcast, a channel targeted to the youth where we critically engage with leading scholars and connect philosophy to contemporary social issues. My name is Rohan, and this week we are joined by Dr. Alice Siu to discuss democracy, deliberation, and the impact of technology on public discourse. Dr. Siu is the Associate Director of the Deliberative Democracy Lab and is a Senior Research Scholar at Stanford University's Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. She has advised policymakers and political leaders around the world at various levels of government, including leaders in China, Brazil, and Argentina. She also holds a PhD from Stanford's Department of Communication, specializing in political communication, deliberative democracy, and public opinion. So before we get a little bit into your work and your views on democracy, etc., I wanted to ask a little bit about your personal experience in academia and sort of if you could highlight how you got to this point and if you have any personal experiences that draw you to the field of public opinion or democracy in general.
It's a question I ask other people, but I'm trying to think of some exciting answers for you. But unfortunately, I grew up uh, just being drawn to the idea of people having a voice. But obviously, that doesn't really translate into a job when you're thinking about it when you're young. So in undergrad, I ended up majoring in economics and public policy, but really I explored a lot of different classes and majors and ended up with these two because public policy at the time was more applicable and actionable. You really kind of saw the theory in economics being applied in different settings. So that's why I paired the two. But really, the exposure to deliberation and more deliberative democracy was when Jim Fishkin, who my then advisor, now boss, arrived at Stanford, and he needed a research assistant. And as many would say, and the rest is history. But really, it was working with him that introduced me to these concepts. And as I did more work into it, it was really exciting to be able to use social science to actually bring people together and have a methodology to do so. So I ended up doing a PhD with Jim Fishkin and then decided to stay and work full time doing this. Part of this is just luck and timing, but I do enjoy the work and the variety of topics and fields that we're able to bring deliberation into.
Sure. I mean, obviously the field is, as you mentioned, super interdisciplinary. There's a lot of applications of various social sciences, etc. Do you think you have like a specific topic or a specific project that you thought was really interesting and sort of your favorite in your journey that you can share with us?
They're certainly hard to pick a favorite, but I think one that I generally refer to is in the late 2000s, and for about 10 years thereafter, we actually spent a lot of time working in mainland China. And I think many people would think that, oh, well, that seems odd and not applicable. Why would you work in a non-democracy? But we worked at very local levels of government in China, and there was such warm reception about how to really make a difference in local public policy. And we were talking about things that were infrastructure projects, like, do I build this road? Do I build this sewage treatment plant? Or do I build a park? It was like real questions that local leaders had. And for a period of time, there was so much interest in local participation, which we enjoyed very much in bringing people together, doing workshops, and having very in depth research papers and meetings about the ability to have more local participation in this form. It's since then. Have not been able to do all that much, but for that period of time, it was very exciting, and I think it's something that not many people would think of when they think of
Yeah.
deliberative democracy.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And I think it's a very good segue into sort of the next couple of questions about how democracy and deliberation and sort of movements, even at the most local level, can emerge in very, um, I guess, non-intuitive environments, as you pointed out. So,
Mhm.
and I guess that does actually lead me to the next question of how would you define democracy? I guess is there sort of a working definition? Obviously, there's a canonical example of democracy emerging in Athens. And so how do you map that sort of definition and what does it look like today, I guess?
Wow, how do you define democracy? A I mean, there's, as you said, there are textbook answers, and there are, what modern day, what people think. I mean, to have a more textbook answers, I mean, there are aspirations of what democracy should be. Some people think um, equality has something to do with it. Others think participation is important. Representation is another aspect of it. But, other things that people kind of words that people often use, like liberty and justice, and like all of those things kind of will probably bubble up in people's head when they think of the word democracy. Um, And I think the way that I think about it, democracy is what a society makes of it, right? Or any form of government for that matter. One authoritarian government is not the same as another authoritarian government. Like Singapore is very different from China. And every democratic country's democracy is quite different because the systems of government inherently uh, control and manifests the different ways the society functions. So, a parliamentary democracy in many European countries operates very differently than how our government works with the different branches of government and having the Senate and the House. So I don't really know how to define democracy because it's so determinant by the various other components. But I would say aspirationally, it's about allowing the public to have a voice in the society they live.
Yeah, I think I really like that answer because a lot of like mainstream media, a lot of public media seems to say that, oh, this country's not a democracy, this country is, there's a lot of binary sort of labeling
Mm.
that's categorization that's done. And it's sort of uncomfortable in the sense that that defines a lot of how we treat certain countries or certain people. And I think your answer perfectly captures that. That's not exactly what democracy in sort of more ideal conceptual way necessarily entails. And so, in that same way, there's a lot of debate about the future of the United States and the democratic ideals within the United States. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what's happening currently, but also historically speaking, how has the United States like Constitution or sort of the principles engaged with democratic ideals in a more general sense?
Mm. What do I think about the present state? Um, Hard question. I I also think that how we think the country is doing today is dependent on our own lived experiences and what our outlook is for our own future or for our families or society's future. So there's a reason why some people are very happy in this country at this moment and some people are not very happy. And it's all based on really our own lived experiences and what ultimately we hope our future could look like, or the future for our children and children's children. So I I would say, like, as of today, I mean, this is what democracy is. And democracy is allowing different voices to come to light and allowing uh, different parties and interests and groups to be able to voice themselves freely. And so I I think that if we put ourselves in situations or in countries where there may not be a lot of freedom to speak or press, etc., it would be a very different environment. And so I think that we are living and breathing what democracy is, and whether some people like it today or may not like it tomorrow, it's still the definition of what a democracy is. So I think that although maybe some people think it's challenging, um, I also think that this is exactly what we signed up for.
Yeah. And in that sense, I think you briefly touched upon this, but uh, I think there's also a lot of sort of back and forth on whether the United States sort of at a very basic level uh, fits the categorization of being a democracy. There's sort of
Mm,
the concept of elected officials, but there's also the Electoral College. Think
mm,
so. Do you have any views on?
mm.
Obviously, again, you mentioned this aspirational take. So obviously, there's a lot of talk about how individual citizens can have their voices heard, but even beyond that, do you think the United States' government complicates the idea of democracy in any way, or does it necessarily fit this categorization?
I think my answer is going to have to be it depends on what we all prioritize, because I think if an individual prioritizes having public participation and really reflective of what the general public thinks in, let's say, its representatives, et cetera, then perhaps democracy is not working, because they would say, well, their constituents are not represented in Congress or the House because maybe California is so large and we only have X number of representatives or senators, and that's not sufficient in number, and that's why there are proposals to expand the House, for example. Um, and there are others that will say, well, your three branches of government are great, but you have let's say the Supreme Court, that the judicial branch, where you know life terms don't make sense because it's been politicized, and it wasn't like that before, but now it is, so you need to reform that. And some people will argue that because there is not enough fluidity in the existing constitution, or the way that our founding fathers created this, mapped out how this country should work, maybe that doesn't make it fully functional. And something that you brought up, it's maybe even just electoral processes with electoral college or first past the post, and the ways that votes are tabulated either through ranked choice or other ways to tally up votes and do elections. Like, that's not democratic. So I really think it depends on how each of us think about their priorities of what we want democracy to look like. And because of that, I think that's why there are a lot of people that are not satisfied, because it's never going to be perfect. And so because it depends on how we rank the different aspirations we have for a democracy. So it's a difficult question. I think I see it from many perspectives, and I think everyone you ask will probably have their own grievances for what is wrong with the present way the system of democracy is working in this country. But at the same time, obviously, people still live here for a reason. And so some things are working out for them. And so perhaps sometimes we should celebrate that.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm reminded of Arrow's theorem, if you may have heard of, regarding how there's sort of no perfect like mathematical way of ranking elected officials on the ballot, something along those lines. And so for me, that sort of rings the idea that perfection is at its core unattainable, but the fundamental trajectory of what we are trying to accomplish and the back and forth regarding reform, etc., that in of itself seems to be evidence that there's something positive happening and something desirable in the long run. And so obviously we've touched a little bit about the future of democracy and the current democracy in the United States, but I wanted to see if you have any views regarding global democracy. I think there's a sort of widespread sense that you will see in the media or in articles that democracy is in crisis for a number of reasons. And do you think you hold this view? And maybe you can talk about what causes this view to exist or what causes democracy to be in crisis in general.
I'm gonna toe the line that I've been uh, sharing, in that it really depends on our individual priorities. Having said that, I think a lot of people have shared or believe that democracy is in crisis because they see perhaps a lot of elections not being competitive, and perhaps speech being censored, limitations in media, issues with judicial branches in different countries, or the list goes on. Um, and and I think that when any one of those factors start declining, then many people will wave up their arms and say we're in trouble. And rightly so for some people, because those may be their priorities. Like free press and freedom of speech could be, very high on the list. And when you do have governments that shut down media or close newspapers, or reporters and others report that they're being censored and they have to quit their jobs, etc., then it does become problematic for many people. And you know, a number of scholars, like Larry Diamond, has written about the steps that countries can take to devolve and become authoritarian countries, and some of them I mentioned. So I think that some of these markers that people use in terms of how democratic countries are is what people are citing as democracy being in crisis globally. But on the flip side, I have to offer, the flip side, being someone that advocates for deliberation, is that um, there are probably reasons why some of these aspects of democracies are failing. And for each country, they may be different. And also, um, it's possible that some portions of the population may prefer some of these uh, components taking a different turn. Um, Many people in China have reported, saying that what's most important to them is the economy and being able to meet their economic needs, and whether or not they get to speak freely may not be a high priority. It would be nice, but it may not be the top priority for them if they have to rank something. And so I honestly think that it really depends on what people are prioritizing in their own minds. And I think it's true that by markers, benchmarks that most people use, that democracy is declining. But so the question is, why is that the case? And what is that what people really want?
Yeah, and I would actually love to pose this question of, is there any sort of structural reasons why you think this might be happening? Obviously, there's certain elections that might be undesirable or certain policies, but in the broader scheme of things, do you see any structural or foundational factors that are driving these phenomena?
Oh, this is not my expertise.
Okay,
I can't say for certain,
sure.
but I just speaking from me being a citizen and a member of the society, um, I think maybe a lot of it has to do with trust, in just the system or in politicians or the like, and just trust in overall seems to be declining in a number of places. And if I don't trust my government to do the right thing, or if I don't trust my local officials to do the right thing, then I am less interested in taking part in this society, and therefore maybe turn to things that I do trust and and control. So I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of things that are declining. But obviously, trust is very intangible, and it's hard to say how you can build trust or how trust declines. But I think that certainly is something that is suffering in many countries.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, we spent a lot of time on this concept of democracy, and I think um, it's probably best to move on to something that's more relevant to your own work, which is the concept of deliberation. Obviously, your work is in uh, understanding what deliberation is and its effects, and I'm sure you'll get. Well, we can talk about that, but I wanted to begin, as always, with a sort of a definition, if you could, about what deliberation looks like and how do you define it? Yeah, in a general sense.
Yeah. Deliberation, I think, simply put, is being able to weigh trade offs and to have a thoughtful discussion about what those trade offs are. And since you're raising just definition wise, I think it's different from debate because in debate, naturally, we're wired to think that someone needs to win. And in a deliberation, no one needs to win. We're just exchanging ideas, exchanging arguments. But the core of it is really weighing the trade offs on the different sides.
Sure. And in that sense, how do you, I guess, like, I'm reminded of like Hegel and the concept of like synthesis and thesis and antithesis. Is that sort of, is the same sort of concept translate into this context? Is there a sort of goal, overarching goal of reaching some new conclusion, or is it just about informing opinions about each side or another side?
I think different scholars in the field would say yes or no, or on a spectrum of what you just shared. I think some people think that deliberation should have an end goal, should have some kind of output to it, whether that's policy, recommendations, consensus, whatever that may be. Others will say that no, you should just have a discussion. It's about having a what Habermas calls a public sphere, and the spirit of schools of public spirit are essential to having a vibrant society and people really being thoughtful about the issues that affect each individual. So I think there's a spectrum of what people think the result of or no result of deliberation should have.
Okay. And I understand that a lot of your work is in the context of deliberative polling. And
Mhm.
so could you maybe talk about what that necessarily entails and how that exactly occurs?
Yes. The deliberative polling methodology is essentially made up of a few components. One is random sampling. And then usually we define a sample, whether that's a city, state, national, multinational population, define the population, and then we administer a survey to capture their opinions before deliberation. And then we will send briefing materials on the discussion topic. Their materials are vetted by an advisory committee for balance and accuracy. Then we bring people together either in person or online for a period of time. It could be a day, could be a weekend, could be multiple days, really depends on how much there is to discuss and how much resources there are. And then when they're come together, they start in small group discussions, moderated in person with a human moderator, if that is the case in person. And then online, we actually have a AI assisted deliberation platform that facilitates the deliberation without a human moderator. They have small group discussion, and then they will come up with questions for an expert panel. And the pair, small group, and expert panel are iterated until the end of the process. And then there is a post deliberation survey at the end of it. Those two surveys, before and after, allow us to compare the opinions that people have after deliberation, and so that we can really see what effects there are. And we usually have transcripts that come from the deliberation as well, so that provides the qualitative insights of how and why people are changing their opinions, what are the reasons they support or oppose something, and it adds a much more holistic view than just looking at survey
Of course.
numbers.
Yeah, and what has sort of been your conclusions from these experiments? Like, I guess one thing is to just compare before and after the surveys, what sort of changes, and then also within the transcript and your analysis of the deliberation itself, do you have any key takeaways that you could share with us?
We've found that people change their opinions very significantly after deliberation, even after just a day's long deliberation, and even online. So a lot of results. So I would say we've published a lot that talk about one aspect of it is decrease in affective polarization. So we found that deliberation actually brings people closer together. So it's not just shifts in attitude towards a certain policy, whether that be immigration or climate. It also brings people closer together in the sense that I like the other person more. And that is the affective polarization is what people refer to a lot as being, polarized or divided. Another aspect of papers that we've written about is that deliberation also produces lasting effects. And what we found is it has lasting effects on attitudes. Obviously, we can't guarantee that all opinions that shift stay because as humans, we often feel that our opinions are rather, what is the right word? Ingrained potentially. But there are opinions that we find last even after a year after deliberation. And more than that, we found that deliberation actually shifts vote intention. So we've done follow ups with some of our participants after a year, and we found that they reportedly intend to vote differently after they deliberate. So it's very exciting to be able to see that it actually changes behavior. Anecdotally, I've done a podcast where I followed up with a set of deliberators from our American One Room project back in 2019. So a year later, I went to them and interviewed one of the small groups. And one participant who was then about 70, lived in Texas, told me that she moved to North Carolina because the event changed her perception about types of conversations that she should be having. She felt that her being in Texas, in the community that she was in, it was really difficult to have different conversations, and so she moved herself to North Carolina. And it was shocking. She even said that if she didn't move, she would just be waiting to die. And it was just amazing to really hear her say that. I mean, obviously, not everyone has that reaction at
Sure.
meeting events, but definitely on one end of the scale. But there are others that report, they go canvassing for a candidate, or they've registered to vote, or they look at different types of media now. So there's a range of different things that people report our behavior changes after deliberation. I can go on, but that is a snapshot of the
Sure,
type of
sure.
research and impact that we've seen from deliberation.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I guess I think you mentioned that most of the topics seem to be revolving around politics and sort of local political landscape. Has there been experiments regarding like other maybe like personal matters or something non-political? And do you think there's any difference in those results? Or yeah,
Non-political. I'm I mean, I suppose we do a lot of deliberations about AI now. I'm not sure if that's considered political or not. But when you say personal, do you have something in mind, of what you mean by that?
like I guess religion could be one thing, maybe. Uh,
Uh, um, we have not done religion specifically. We've done abortion, which obviously issues referring to religion comes up. Um, but I would say, the vast majority of our deliberations are about proposals that are actionable, like
mhm,
things that people can change.
sure.
So perhaps that's, it lends itself to more policy oriented. Um, so we certainly we I don't think yeah, I'm trying to think about what other personal topics there could be. Nothing coming to mind at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I think that certainly makes sense. And one thing I also wanted to, and something I noticed from your work is that you seem to scale this deliberation and this polling across the world, essentially, in various countries, various different places. So I was wondering if you could speak to, whether there's variables regarding socioeconomic status or um, level of knowledge, prior knowledge. What sort of factors do you think uh, influence the results of these pollings?
Uh, I would say, I mean, culturally, I don't think that we necessarily see a lot of differences. I mean, we certainly don't change the method based on where we're at. So the method and the components that I shared and those steps, those stay the same no matter where we are. Um, there may be, for example, a lot of people say, well, when you're in Japan, people tend to not speak up very quickly. And maybe the discussions are a little slower. I think that may be true in the beginning, and then people are a little bit more reserved or want to be more respectful. But once people get into a conversation, we find that it's just people converse and talk just like everywhere else in the world. I think maybe some cultures are slower to start, but once they get moving, I think everyone is just as happy to engage in these conversations and exchange their views. Um, Certainly, turnout rates are definitely different by culture. I would say we've done projects in Latin America where um, we have said, the event starts at 9, and we've definitely gotten some participants that come in substantially later than that, because it's just acceptable in the culture to do that. So definitely a lot of learnings in terms of how you actually get people to show up and showing up on time.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think the main takeaway is that the concept of deliberation and conversing has a very sort of a beneficial and universal effect across whatever sort of cultural norms or traditions seem to pervade the environment. So one thing I think you mentioned is your use of AI in some of this methodology. So I was wondering if you could talk about how you leverage technology in general, and then AI, and sort of what that effect has been in your work.
Yeah, we started using our AI assisted deliberation platform several years ago, and we created it with our partners in management science and engineering at Stanford. The original intent was that our partners wanted to figure out how technology could help democracy. And like true academics, we sat for many meetings and had a lot of whiteboarding and trying to figure out what we would do. Um, Ultimately, Jim and I, shared that we have one of the criticisms that we get from a lot of people about deliberation is that we can't scale because you can only bring X number of people into a room together, and you need a human facilitator to kind of manage the discussion. And in order to scale, you would have to have many, many, many moderators facilitate discussions, and you have to train and ensure quality, etc. And so there's a lot of criticism about that, and for many years. So we wanted to figure out how to solve that. And in discussing with our collaborators, they thought, well, we need a platform that allows what a moderator does to be automated in that platform. So that's what we set out to create. And we took all the years of training that we had for building and training moderators, and we built all the roles and responsibilities of what a human moderator does into the deliberation platform. So the platform has an agenda management system. It cues people to speak, nudges people to speak, and ensures balance of arguments. It's it, what am I trying to say? The detects offensive language. So an assortment of things of what a human would do. And we've deployed the platform now in 50 different countries. It operates in 40 different languages. We've logged over 100,000 hours of deliberation on the platform. It's been really exciting to see it succeed so well. And honestly, we're just waiting for a society or a government to say, we want the millions of people in our society to deliberate on the platform, because that's what we aspire
Hmm.
have. I mean, that's what we want to happen. And it's been really exciting to use technology in this sense. And obviously, like everyone else in the world, we're using various AI tools for analyzing deliberation, studying and research in deliberation. A lot of it has made it a lot easier to really dissect and understand, parse through what people are saying. But I think what's most exciting for us is the real ability to scale deliberation. But we're just waiting for the opportunity.
Of course, it sounds very cool. And I guess in the future, do you have any future plans on how else you could use technology? Do you have any thoughts on where else it could be potentially transformative?
I mean, if we're talking about deliberation, I mean, there's many people researching, including us, using agents to deliberate or predicting opinions. I mean, those are happening already. I'm not sure if I have out of the box thinking at the moment for this, but I mean, this is all to say that while I talk about all this excitement about using tech to help us, it's also the bottom line is people just need to talk to each other. so so as much as we have all these technologies to help facilitate these discussions to happen, it doesn't work unless people actually want to engage in discussion with each other.
Of
So,
course.
if anyone is, listening at this moment, the bottom line is that deliberation requires another human being, and you need to engage and listen to each other to build those skills. So, yes, would love to have more tech involved to make it easier for people to engage, but ultimately, people have to want to engage.
Of course, very helpful advice. And in similar vein, it sort of brings me to my last topic, which is about our young audiences and the youth in general. How do you envision them having a role in the landscape of deliberation, in politics in general? If you have any advice for how they should proceed regarding these topics, that'd be very helpful for you to share.
Well, my advice is just as I said, go out and talk to people. Um, I I don't have any, silver bullet advice for people. I think that I spend a lot of time working in schools, um, K through 12, also in higher ed, and I spend the time because I think it's really important for young people students, even as young as in elementary school, to actually learn and practice the skills of engaging in discussion, listening to others, and formalizing their own opinions and arguments. I think that these are skills that we have to build and hone and practice on a regular basis. I think that if we're able to actually do that in schools in a regular cadence, many of us would not be having these discussions about why people are not able to have conversations with each other, or why we are so polarized, or why we don't like someone or some group just because they think differently from us. I think many of those questions would disappear. Many of those complaints would disappear. So my effort of working in schools and with students is really to reiterate all the time that learning these skills and engaging in deliberation as early and as often as possible is really essential. And for those that want to continue making a change afterwards, go run for office. And
Definitely.
as cheesy as many people think it is, like, be the change, right? Everyone says it, but no one actually goes to do it. A lot of I talk to a lot of students where they complain about, these policies should look like this, and that's the wrong way to do it. And, it will continue to be the wrong way unless someone is elected to office and does it the right way, quote unquote. So I think that for those that are really motivated to want to have an impact, and make a difference in that way, running for office is a good way to do it.
Of course. Okay, so I won't take up any more of your time. I think we can wrap up the episode here. So thank you very much, Dr. Sue, for your time. I definitely enjoyed this and learned a lot. I think it's a fresh perspective from sort of the more um, conceptual, philosophical topics that we have on this podcast, and it's very helpful for your perspective. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I think we can end it here.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to chat.